So we're now going to move into our theme meetings. So if you're on the, you're now going to hear from MIDAS, IMPaCT and CHAI.
Hello everyone, I'm Iram Durrani. I'm the Public Advisor, Deputy Co-Lead for the IMPaCT theme. And welcome to today's cross-cutting theme session. Today, the cross-cutting themes, including MIDAS, IMPaCT, and CHAI, have arranged some presentations for you. But before we start the session, I would like to mention a few rules that we always talk about is to please keep your microphones on mute and use the chat buttons for questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end. So if you want to ask your questions directly, you can, or you can use the chat button as well. And all our presentations will be available on our web pages and website. Can I have the second slide, please? Before we start the session, I would like to introduce my co-host, Jerry Allen. He's the Public Advisor, Deputy Co-Lead for MIDAS, and he will be co-hosting the session with me today. Dave, can you please change the slide for me? Thank you. So today's session, MIDAS will be doing their presentations first, and they have planned 3 presentations for you today. The first presentation is by Helen Gooch. She is a clinical lead in physiotherapy in neurology at the Lancashire Teaching Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, and she will be sharing her experience as a RACES intern with you. Her presentation will be followed by Joe Harrison and Jerry Allen, and their presentation is on developing public advisors' summaries of RACES, a patient focus. And at the end, there will be a presentation by Valerio Benedetto and Louis Philippe, and their topic is MIDAS Health Economics. They are from the University of Central Lancashire.
Hi, my name's Helen Gooch and I'm a clinical lead physio at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals, and I've also recently taken on a role as a research assistant at the University of Central Lancashire. I've also just completed the ARC North West Coast RACES internship. This internship can be divided into 2 parts. The first is to complete a rapid conversion evidence summary, and the second is to complete the Implementation Science Masters module and develop a plan for implementing a change to practice. For the work, I chose to look at strength training for people with multiple sclerosis, or MS for short. Physical activity, including strength training, is a key component of management for people with MS. However, inequalities in relation to low levels of physical activity are well recognised for people with long-term conditions and within the MS population. I embarked on this RACES internship to better understand the role of strength training, but also the practicalities of delivering strength training for people with MS and to improve service provision. My RACES question was to find out what a strength training intervention for people with MS should look like. The literature search identified a systematically designed guideline from 2013 and 4 subsequent systematic reviews. My project evaluated and summarised these 4 reviews and cross-referenced individual study details to the guidelines. The documented guidelines were broadly supported by the evidence and provide a basis for the parameters of exercise. However, a clearly defined intervention was not identified. Further reading outside of the RACES project identified that the NICE clinical guidelines for adults with MS recommend supervised strength training programmes, and a number of qualitative studies suggest benefits of group exercise. Taking this into consideration, I chose to use the strength guidelines to design a supervised group strengthening exercise intervention. I used the consolidated framework for implementation research to understand context and plan the implementation strategy. Health inequalities were explored using the Health Inequalities Assessment tool, and a public advisor has provided initial feedback on the intervention and implementation plan. My plan is to use a PDSA or Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle and focus pre-implementation work on engaging key stakeholders, securing resources and educating delivery staff. Evaluating the project will also be important, and as well as collecting service and clinical outcomes, the process of implementation will also be evaluated, with service user involvement being key to this. The RACES internship has given me opportunity to work on a project grounded in clinical practice with protected time to do this. It's also allowed me to develop knowledge and skills to take back into both my clinical and research settings, very specifically around strength training for MS, but more widely around research methodology and health inequalities. The RACES work has been published and a poster has been developed for the module assessment. Plans are underway to develop the RACES work into a layperson RACES, and I hope to be able to implement my exercise intervention in the future.
Thank you, Helen. We're going to go to our next presentation now by Jo Harrison and Jerry Allen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jo Harrison, Research Fellow in Evidence Summary and Synthesis at UCLan and member of the MIDAS team. Together with Jerry Allen, who's the co-lead for MIDAS, Public Advisor co-lead for MIDAS, we're going to go through our experiences of developing a Public Advisor Summary for RACES, which we've named a patient focus. So just brief background on RACES, stands for Rapid Conversion of Evidence Summaries. The summaries of systematic review evidence with a critical commentary. So as you just heard from Helen, they're written for clinicians and by clinicians, but with the support of the RACES team. And they have three main aims, excuse me, capacity building, so enabling the clinicians to critically appraise systematic reviews and interpret the findings and apply them to practice, knowledge exchange within the clinician's own organisation and within peer-reviewed journals, and then implementation of those findings into practice. We will set the remit of designing a Public Advisor Summary of RACES to actually start to transfer the RACES knowledge that we've identified to patients and to public, and particularly in issues pertinent to patients and issues where a health inequality has been identified. They have to be written by public advisors, so they are written in a layperson language, but with support and guidance from the RACES team, and they provide an overview of key messages in a clear and understandable format, which we've named a patient focus. So I'm just going to hand over to Jerry, who can then talk through his experiences of doing this.
Thank you, Jo. My experiences, everybody, I've got on the next couple of slides. So I've labelled this the public advisor experience. I've got it into three kind of key areas, which I hope not just the public advisors in attendance today, but the academics and colleagues from the sector will also find useful. I'll be critical of myself here, but overall I want to say it was a very enjoyable experience. But those three experiences from my perspective, first of all, what I've labelled the academic experience. The RACES summary required me to work to academic deadlines and respond positively to feedback and critique of early drafts of my work. For me, this was a very new experience. Whilst I am a very experienced professional in many sectors, it required a very different way of adapting my skill set. The next one was what I've labelled a learning experience. And I am being very self-critical here. I thought I knew how to write to a decent standard, but I was wrong. I needed to learn a whole new set of skills. Learning to summarise complexity into a few hundred words is actually a very useful and highly transferable set of learning. But the art of the précis, the art of the summary, is an acquired skill. And I'm going to misquote Mark Twain here, who once stated, "I didn't have time to write a shorter letter, so I wrote a longer one instead." Very apt, I think, in terms of my learning experience with this RACES summary. And in terms of this particular part of the world, I do look forward to testing myself further. Next slide, please, Dave. It was also, however, very much a validating experience. There were struggles, particularly with the challenging feedback and sometimes a need to reframe my thinking. But I persevered, and I do feel proud of my contribution. The challenges of the academic experience are countered by the personal and professional validation of having my contribution noted in an important publication. So the final races, the final version of Living with Dementia, the races summary, is now available, and authors and contributors have been duly noted and credited. And the final version of the Living with Dementia races summary you'll see on our next slide, and download information will be available at the end of the presentation, and Joe will take you through the final stages of our brief update to you today. Back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Joey. So as you can see, this is the patient focus that Joey was discussing, and it is available on our website under the MIDAS pages within the races section of the MIDAS pages. So just to discuss the progress and the next steps, obviously we've completed this first pilot really of a patient focus. The next steps are that the public advisors at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals are preparing to start this process, working on the project that Helen described previously. And we're going to be thinking about alternative modes of presentation. So in addition to doing the patient summary, also things such as infographics, excuse me, where we can present, for example, the exercises that are recommended for MS strength training in an infographic presentation, or maybe a YouTube video. And we're also going to explore links to these patient focus with charity and patient information pages, and subsequently open the opportunity up to more public advisors. So I'd just like to thank Jerry for all his input as well, because he's done a fantastic job, and I think he did himself a disservice because I thought it was excellent work all the way through. And if you'd like to find out more about the public advisor summaries for races, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Jerry, for sharing your experiences. We're going to go to our last presentation by Valerino Benedetto and Louis Felipe. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Valerio Benedetto from UCLan.
I'm Luis Felipe from Lancaster University.
And we are the two health economists working in the MIDAS team as part of ARC Northwest Coast. In this short presentation today, we are going to outline the type of health economic support we can offer to ARC Northwest Coast members and staff, and we will also describe some examples of our current and previous work. So in terms of the health economic support we can offer, we can help develop economic sections for grant applications, as well as designing and co-producing economic evaluations for randomized controlled trials or other study designs. We can also run systematic reviews of economic studies, econometric analysis, and we can provide general methodological support in health economics. In this slide, I'm going to talk very briefly about some of my work, which can represent examples of the type of support we can offer in terms of health economics. In the Sputnik trial, I contributed to the development of an economic model for a cost-effectiveness analysis comparing two imaging techniques used to detect potential malignancy in solitary pulmonary nodules. Another study where I'm currently involved in is the reverse feasibility study, which is investigating whether self-monitoring of blood pressure can reduce cardiovascular risk in people with raised blood pressure. And together with Professor Andy Clegg, our MIDAS team lead, we designed the economic session of a successful grant application. And now we are busy working on the data collection plan and on the willingness to pay analysis. Lastly, together with Luis, other colleagues in MIDAS, and with the help of two public advisors, we have developed two systematic reviews of economic studies on areas where the quality adjusted life year, or QALY, might not fully reflect outcomes. The areas we identified are mobile health or mHealth and learning disabilities, and we hope to publish these reviews soon.
We can also do some standard econometric analysis and predictions. For instance, I have been working with the Improving Population Health team to predict the utilization of community services so we can better allocate resources by neighborhoods. In this case, I'm using a very finely detailed data set from the Liverpool CCG and econometric methodology to first estimate the socioeconomic and health determinants that are driving the number of contacts within the community services, like age, deprivation, chronic diseases, etc., and then use those need determinants to predict utilization and construct a need-based allocation formula. On a completely different topic and methodology, I'm also learning how to implement discrete choice experiments. I'm finishing a paper where I use discrete choice experiments to understand how people prioritize policies and consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, I would be able to tell you how many deaths people would be willing to accept daily in order to avoid another lockdown. Unfortunately, this study is done in Portugal, but I will eventually apply the DCE methodology in the ARC and in the UK, because DCEs are very useful to, for instance, compute the willingness to pay for a new service, a new treatment, a new technology, or a new policy. If you want to know more about us, join us in the MIDAS Health Economics subgroup, where we can show you in more detail what we can do with health economics. Please come. You would be very, very, very welcome. So here are our contacts. You won't have time to write them down, so we'll put them in the chat. Thank you very much, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And now I will invite the audiences if they have any questions. Do you want to ask them yourself, or?
Anybody? Anybody have any questions? Please raise your hand or put something in the chat. Kath, are you wanting to ask? No? Okay, well, it looks like if there's nothing else from anybody.
I was going to ask Valerio and Luis.
Sorry? I can hear somebody.
Can you unmute, please, and ask your question? No? Okay, I'm a bit conscious of time, and we need to introduce our next session, so I'll let Jerry take over from now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Iram, and thank you again, Iram, for hosting the session so far today. As ever, I feel kind of humbled to follow you on from here. Everybody, I'll be guiding you through the next two sections of the MIDAS presentations, IMPaCT and TRI. And our first presentation is on IMPaCT. It's a pre-recorded presentation from Colette and George. Can you let that run, please, Dave? Thank you.
Morning, Jerry. The presentation's actually going to be done live.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you very much for that, Jerry. I'll just share my screen. If you could let me know that that can be seen, that would be wonderful.
Not yet. There you go.
Fabulous. Okay, thanks for that, Jerry. My name's Colette Miller, and I'm a researcher at the University of Central Lancashire, and I share the role of Capacity Delivery Manager with Dr. Georgiou, who will be speaking shortly. And we're based in the Implementation and Capacity Building team, and today we just wanted to share an update of the capacity building activities that have been going on in the ARC since 2019, when it was established. So all capacity building activities in the ARC aim to support research and implementation that aligns to national and local priorities. It's key that people and projects we support use the HIAT at all stages of development, design and delivery. And similarly, at least one public advisor should be recruited to support people and projects, and the ultimate aim should be to positively impact socioeconomic health inequalities. Now, through capacity building activities such as training, funding, providing networking opportunities, etc., we are aiming to increase research capacity for individuals and member organisations to enable them to work together to create a sustainable culture of capacity building post the ARC. One way that this has been achieved has been through supporting the development of future leaders through the ARC North West Coast Doctoral Fellowship Scheme. And our aim for this in the ARC was to support more studentships than we did in the Clark. And this goal has now been achieved with support of an additional 2 member universities, including Edge Hill and Liverpool John Moores, who have joined us to provide funding for further studentships. So across the 5 member organisation HEIs, we've completed 6 rounds of recruitment since 2019, and the ARC theme leads and capacity building team have screened over 200 applications and attended 74 virtual interviews, which have resulted in the appointment of 26 ARC North West Coast Doctoral Fellows. Now you can see here that we have a word cloud of the different things that the projects relate to, but the doctoral fellows meet regularly as members of the ARC North West Coast Doctoral Fellow Network, and at these meetings we provide them with opportunities to network, receive additional training and support over and above that that's provided by their host HEI, and they also learn more about the NAHR Academy and how they can get involved and make the most of that opportunity. So for instance, things like attending the annual training camp, which seeks to train future leaders, and Peter Teodorowski, who you just heard from by speaking to Selena, attended this year. And he has since said that this was the highlight of his studentship so far, especially as he was part of a team that won an award for public and patient involvement as part of the event. And the doctoral fellows are all keen to make the most and engage with the Academy membership, and 3 have recently submitted applications for short placement awards, where they will go and learn from and work with teams elsewhere in the NAHR infrastructure. So fingers crossed for all of those to have positive outcomes. And we're sure that as they progress through the doctoral studies, they'll continue to make a meaningful contribution to their host themes, and we'll continue to support them at every stage of their PhD journey. And I'll now hand over to George.
Thanks, Colette. Good morning, everyone. I'm Georgiou. I'm the other Research Capacity Delivery Manager, and I'm going to talk to you about the internships that we've been offering over the course of this ARC so far. Hopefully you're all aware that we do offer internships and that they are open to all the member organisations except the universities. We won't support internships for university staff. We're currently offering 4 internship streams, and we'll look at those at the next slide. I did a head count, and we've got 16 member organisations now that have interns working in their organisations. So that's roughly a quarter of the member organisations so far. The current round of the research internships, which closed last week, I dealt with over 30 inquiries and spoke to at least 25, 26 people about those. Sadly, that didn't turn into 25, 26 applications because, as Mark mentioned in his opening address to you all, even though people are committed to doing these, getting the support from their organisations at the moment is proving difficult because of the pandemic. But we have successfully offered 27 internships to date. So we are achieving the target that we set out to do. Next slide, please, Colette. So what have we been offering so far? The races interns, and thank you, Helen, for your excellent presentation earlier about your experiences of being a races intern. So far, we've offered 9 of those over the lifetime of the current ARC. Fellowship development is something else that we've been focusing on. And as you know, we in the Clark, we successfully supported interns to apply for pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowships and doctoral fellowships. We continue to do that. And at the moment, we've got 9 being supported through pre-doc, 1 through doctoral and 1 through advanced fellowships. Data science is another success, I think, for the current ARC. We've got 6 data science interns, and we heard from Lee Hughes a couple of months ago about her experiences of being a data science intern. And the current round, which just closed, is around doing small research projects similar to what we did in the Clark. And there's a nice word cloud there that sort of looks at the topics that we've been currently supporting through the lifetime of the ARC so far, and obviously we're going to add to that word cloud as we've recruit to the current round of internships. Next slide, please, Colette. So what's going to happen in the future? More RACES interns. Obviously, we feel that these are important and successful. We're getting good engagement from the member organisations. We're going to continue to look for that talent within the North West Coast, those fellowship development internships. We want to build that capability and capacity within North West Coast and retain it. Data science, obviously, we're going to continue, and they are being supported via the CHI team, who you're going to hear from later. And one of the latest developments that we're looking at, and this is hot off the press, we are going to be looking at rolling out internships that will support mental health research and implementation early in 2022. And hopefully Mark might give you an update as to where we're up to with that at the moment. Thank you for your attention. And the last slide, please, Colette. If you do want to get in touch with us, you can email us at the generic email address that both Colette and I share. So one of us can answer any inquiries that you've got regarding internships or the PhDs that we offer.
Thank you, Colette, and thank you, George. We're going to move on to a second IMPaCT presentation in a moment from Catherine, but I'm just checking timings, everybody. So I'm going to make a little bit of an executive decision here. Any questions, any feedback you'd like to give to Colette and George, and indeed for Catherine in terms of the next presentation, could I ask you to please post those in the chat, because we are getting a little pressed for time. So we're now going to move on to the second presentation in the IMPaCT section. This is from our colleague Catherine Berzins, and Catherine is going to advise us about the De-Stress project. And this is a pre-recorded presentation. If you can run that, please, Dave. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Catherine Berzins. I'm a research fellow in the IMPaCT team based at UCLan. I'm going to give a brief overview of a study I'm working on that's aiming to improve primary care responses to poverty-related mental distress. The study is led by a team at Exeter University, and the PI is Dr. Felicity Thomas. It's part of the South West Peninsula ARC and funded by the NIHR. The study is an evaluation of an implementation of a training intervention aimed at general practitioners. The original study was called the De-Stress Project, and this implementation follow-on is called De-Stress 2. The intervention was initially developed at Exeter and is being implemented both there in central London and up here in North West Coast. So to put the study in context, what are the issues? Many patients present to their GPs with mental distress caused or exacerbated by poverty. Many GPs feel conflicted in how best to support these patients. Prescribing antidepressants might be helpful, but often isn't. This prescribing can leave some low-income patients feeling disempowered and mistrustful of their GPs. GPs themselves can also feel dissatisfied and overburdened by such cases. The intervention was developed after extensive research with GPs and people who had experienced poverty-related mental distress, and it had a strong PPIE component throughout. The training is a short training session based on work with GPs and low-income patients to identify best practice within the constraints of a 10-minute consultation. And the De-Stress Project website has a range of resources and information about this. It provides a framework for practice centred around addressing social causes of mental distress in a person-centred way. It provides a set of microtherapeutic practices aiming to build trust, identify strengths, and provide alternatives to antidepressants. These include things like active listening and the choice of language. Helps build GP confidence and legitimacy to know when to act as supporters rather than fixers. And it's accredited by the Royal College of General Practitioners, who also produced a 5-minute summary of the research, which is used in the training session. The training is being delivered by GP trainers who are GPs themselves. They will deliver a short training session of less than an hour within practices, probably during a practice meeting. The training will be co-delivered with community partners. These are people who have experience of living in low-income communities themselves. We've recruited 9 GP trainers and 7 community partners to deliver the training here in North West Coast. We aim to recruit 36 GP practices, deliver the training, and carry out a follow-up session to see whether there have been any perceived changes in practice. The training implementation will be evaluated using mixed methods. This includes questionnaires with patients, interviews with GPs and patients, and reflection on training. There will also be a regional community partner steering committee, and all this will hopefully result in a training manual in preparation for a rollout across England in phase 2 of the study. This is planned to take place in 2023. The final slide shows an overview of the study within a timeline. The orange colour shows the extent of the PPIE embedded throughout the study. As can be seen, we hope to have some findings by autumn 2022, both about the implementation of the intervention and its perceived impact. I look forward to sharing those next year. Thank you for listening.
I want to thank Catherine for that excellent presentation. And as stated before, colleagues, because we have got a bit of an overrun of time, if you do have any questions for Colette and George from their really good presentation a little earlier, and Catherine, could I ask that you please post those in the chat? I've actually just seen one posted through for Catherine there from Steph Tomlinson. We're now going to move on to Chai, and we are going to hear from Pete Dixon, Ollie Butters and Wes Baker, and they're going to advise us on their aims and how to highlight how data can help highlight health equity and inequalities. Let it run, please, Dave. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the theme update from the Care and Health Informatics theme for this December's ARCFEST. I'm going to continue with this sort of thread of health equity and health inequalities that's been running throughout this morning and talk to you about how that relates to the world of data. So in order for us to tackle health inequalities, we need to understand their extent, for which we need to look at the data. But unfortunately, we don't always have that data. The data could have been collected for an entirely different purpose, for instance, so-called secondary use data, or there may be other reasons. But also the collection of data or the design of the project may have been inherently inequitable, which can lead to issues of embedding and entrenching inequalities. I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the issues around this, and then my colleague Ollie Butters will be speaking to Wes Baker from Merseycare about some on-the-ground local experience of this and what that means in practice. So one reason why there might be a lack of data for some groups, such as marginalised groups, is that those groups have a lack of access to healthcare in the first place. So we know, for instance, that for migrants, less than 1/3 of new entrants eligible for TB screening at ports register with a GP. And similarly, amongst the homeless, there are particularly low rates of GP registration. So if that is the case, we may need to look at other ways, other sources of data on those groups. Also, things like longitudinal data sources and genetic databases may suffer from a lack of data representativeness due to undersampling in various groups. For instance, the UK Biobank, we know that people in there are actually healthier, older, and from better off socioeconomic backgrounds than the general population. So if we extrapolate the results from the people in the biobank to the whole population as a whole, that can have significant difficulties and issues. So as you can hear from the Scientific American, a clarion call for more diversity in our genomic databases. Amongst the population-based data that we do have, we can have missing data in certain fields. Here's a recent report from the Nuffield Trust looking at ethnicity coding in English health service datasets. And that found that many of those datasets do not routinely include ethnicity. And as a proxy for that, they used other things like ethnicity recorded within hospital records. But unfortunately, we know that that is very often poorly coded. So without that robust data behind that, we can't get a handle on certain things. So for instance, that did mean that estimates of COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, deaths, etc., were very hard to get a proper handle on. And even though we knew that, when we moved on to the vaccination program, again, ethnicity was not often being collected. Now, Wes and Ollie later on will be talking a little bit more in detail about sort of incomplete data and what that means. There's also lots of other issues with data and inequalities. So we hear not a lot nowadays about data being garnered from smart tech and wearables, things like Fitbit. But we know that the uptake of those sorts of devices is less in certain groups. So for instance, those from the lower socioeconomic backgrounds and the elderly are less likely to use these devices. But conversely, they're the types of populations who benefit most from such optimized medical interventions. But if the data is not coming from those representative populations, then you've got a problem. Also, for historical reasons, consent necessary for obtaining data may be withheld in marginalized populations. Artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques will inherently generate bias models when based on biased data. So a non-health example, which probably a lot of you are familiar with, the voice recognition system in satellite navigation systems will not recognize the voice of the female driver, but will recognize the voice of the male passenger. This is a godsend to 1970s stand-up routines, but for the wider population and utility of the devices, it's not really good. And we've got to remember that these things don't happen in a vacuum. There's AI developers and researchers behind this who all have their own intrinsic biases, which will perhaps unconsciously feed in to what they're developing. And these people are not representative of the population who are affected by the resulting outputs. So that's just a little brief overview of the various things to be cognizant of when thinking about data and your own research projects and interventions that you might want to use or look at critically appraising other people's work. I'll now pass on to Ollie and Wes, who can talk about this from a sort of more real-world example at the coalface.
Hi, Wes. Thanks for coming to talk to us today. Could you give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Wes Baker. I'm Director of Strategic Analytics, Economics and Population Health Management at MercyCare, and I work on population health projects supporting the trusts within MercyCare, but also on a place and ICS basis. You may have heard one of the projects I work on called System P, and that's looking at how we use data to help address some of the health inequalities.
Cool. So Pete has just given us some examples of where missing data can have an impact in us trying to measure health inequalities, and it can also cause health inequalities itself. And that's sort of been very much at perhaps a national and a broader level. Do you have any examples of locally where lack of relevant data has had an impact on what you're trying to do?
Yeah, it's something that came up recently when we started to work with speaking with Asylum Link, and we're particularly interested around mental health for particularly disadvantaged communities like asylum seekers. And not all asylum seekers will let their GP know that they're claiming asylum because the stigma that is associated with it. Also, when they do get indefinite leave to remain, they change that flag from being an asylum seeker to a BAME characteristic. And if the BAME characteristic is general, like Asian, it's very hard then to find those groups of people that are still disadvantaged. So if somebody who's come from war-torn Syria, traveled across Europe to get here, and all the trauma that's happened in the meantime, how do I find you? How do I proactively find you to understand and reach out to you as an organization? And it's really hard when the data is classified as Asian or there's no link to let me know that that person was ever a suicide. In addition to that, people like myself who's BAME could mask that individual. So because I've lived here all my life and somebody's come from Syria, suddenly you're looking at the people like myself and you might say there's not really looking at generally the population of Asian groups of people or from a black characteristic because we group them in that way. You're not able to really, I might block or mask their need, and that's an issue as well. So having that break and detailed and ethnicity breakdown allows us to really identify the needs of this population and avoids one group of masking another.
Okay, yeah. So with that in mind, is there sort of an intervention or something that you would like to have done but not been able to because of those kind of data issues?
Yeah, I mean, the project we were particularly interested in is looking at serious suicide and self-harm, serious self-harm. And one area we would like to look at is the BAME population in particular, and also asylum seekers as a separate component of that as well. But the work is ongoing, but it is an issue that we're finding. How do we find this information within the data sets? And there's going to be gaps in the data. So this is causing us a bit of an issue to think through. How do we help? What do we need to do to help us identify this? going forward. So it just means that our intervention won't be as impactful and we'll miss people. And that's always a risk when you've got gaps in that data set.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if we're going to fix this problem, what do we need to do now? What change can we enact to start making this better?
So there's two solutions. One is a quick win. We could use other data sets to help augment the gaps. So for example, if I look at primary care data, and if there's gaps where someone's called it an Asian community of, say, someone with a serious mental health condition, and if they're known to Merseycare, I can then look across the patient record to Merseycare and see if they've captured more about the ethnicity. So for example, they've got it might be in secondary care data, and our data tends to be a bit richer with ethnicity because we break down. It's not perfect. There's still gaps, and you get the unknowns in there, but you do get a bit more in terms of this person's from Bangladesh, this person's from Pakistan, India, Surrey, etc. So you do get richness in data, so it allows you then to move across and actually pick out what their ethnicity is, or compare what the acute data has on that person or community. So you've got options to look at as a quick win. There is a risk with that because if the person doesn't access secondary care services, or the coding is poor in all three, then it's not a perfect solution. It's just a quick win if you need to do something very quick and crude. Ultimately, we need to start to collect the data, which is a more medium to long term approach, appropriately at source, and start to think of all these protected characteristics that we need to factor in the person that's coming in. So if someone was an asylum seeker, we need to be able to keep a flag on that person of some sorts to allow us then to find those groups of people, be proactive in their care, or giving the option to the individual, of course, to say that we'd like to keep that on, just so help us in the future to help identify and support your needs rather than waiting for them to become in crisis. But also breaking down the level of ethnicity down to where people are originally from. So if they did come originally from Syria or Iraq or from Iran, and they've come over to the UK, it's actually registering that. So then eventually we can at least find, if we don't have the asylum seeker flag on there, then we can actually go in and look at the population group in particular and find those protective characteristics. And I think that's going to be really important, especially if we're looking at children and young people who've come along to the UK, and help us to identify people who've been in the UK from birth versus people who have travelled and have just recently come into the country and claimed asylum.
Yeah, no, I can see how that's really important to get on and start getting the data properly collected at source. That's really interesting, Wes. That's been a really helpful conversation. So thanks for coming along, and we'll speak to you another time. Cheers.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks both. I thought that was really interesting to hear from Wes about his experiences. So thank you to everyone for listening today. That wraps up our presentation for this ARCFEST. If you do wish to get in touch with us, there is our email address there, kaiquery@liverpool.ac.uk. And we'll now open the floor up for any questions you may have on what you've just heard. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. We will have time, I think, for one question. One question has been posted in the chat for our colleagues who've just done the CHI presentation. So I don't know which one of you wants to pick this up, but could I ask you to be brief, please, with your answer. How can member organisations work with the CHI theme to address issues around missing data, which would be useful to address issues around health inequalities?
Should I go for that one? It's
yes, please.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.
Knock yourself out. Knock yourself out, Pete. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try. So, one suggestion we could have is the ARC-CHI internship that was mentioned earlier on, that Sarah posted in the chat when George was speaking. So we'd be very interested if someone wants to do an internship from one of our member organisations to look at how they can deal with how they can address these issues around health inequalities and the missing data, and how that affects them in terms of what they'd like to do and how they can actually improve that going forward. So if you do have an idea, you know, you want to do that and you are from one of the member organisations, please get in touch with us at that email that you saw earlier. I don't know if Ollie or Sarah would like to add anything else to that.
Thanks, Pete.
Nothing
from me really. I think you've covered it all. Just yeah, get in touch with us and find out, you know, how we can help them.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Pete, and thank you again to everybody for that excellent presentation. Reason I want to move us on, everybody, because we're going to finish this section today before we go to break with some live polls. So I'm just going to ask Dave to queue up the first question, so you can kind of get yourself ready, please, everybody, with your buttons. Here is question number 1. Was this cross-cutting session useful to you and your organisation? And pretty straightforward. You either answer yes, no, or unsure. So if you could set your answers, please, then I'll read out the poll results. I do have the results of the MIDAS poll on my screen. So I'm just going to read that out, everybody, but I do appreciate that not everybody is seeing this. So in terms of question 1, was the cross-cutting theme useful to you? It was a resounding 100% of people who did vote, voting yes.
Probably just you and me, Jerry.
Exactly, Mark. Exactly,
no, we did have about 80% votes.
Yes. Okay. Oh, well, that's good. That's more than a UK general election, and look what kind of decisions they make based on those polls. Are we ready for the second question then, Dave?
Yes, we are. The second question is up.
Oh, the MIDAS poll 2 is, which part of the cross-cutting theme session did you like the most? And in terms of the unavailability of time, I will not read all those out. So please go through those individual suggestions there, and you are allowed to vote more than once, I believe, Dave?
That is correct. That's multiple choice.
Yeah, thank you. So just to note to colleagues, whilst people are considering their responses, I think there are still people who haven't seen the poll. So I do apologise that to those of you who can't do that. But Dave has advised that we are getting responses from a significant majority of the people in attendance at the conference today.
We are, yes. If you do have an issue, maybe if you could just pop your answer into the chat, and we'll populate those onto the polls once we finish the poll questions. So if you can just pop your question or your answer onto the chat.
Thanks, Dave. And hopefully those who are voting will have voted, and Dave will pop the results on and I'll read them out. Here we go. So I will not kind of go through this in detail, because I'm hoping the majority of people on there can see the responses to that. And it was our final presentation that I think drew the most results out. So thank you for that, Dave. And on to our final poll question, and then we will be moving on to a break, everybody. So this is the final poll question, everybody. What would you like to see covered in the cross-cutting sessions at future ARCFESTs? So you are required to write in an answer to this, everybody. It's not a simple yes, no, or other. I'll repeat the question for those who can't see it. So MIDAS poll question 3, what would you like to see covered in the cross-cutting sessions at future ARCFESTs? So if you could have a quick think about that and pop an answer in. And if there's time, I will read out 1 or 2 of those responses. Somebody has asked the question about what are the options. Just to repeat, this is not a multiple choice poll, this one. So people are just asked to type in what they think would be topics that could be covered in future cross-cutting sessions at ARCFESTs. So I'm conscious of time, Dave. So if we're ready, let's just conclude that one so we can move on. As stated, we've had a variety of responses from colleagues across the room. So when we share the information from today's ARCFEST, you will be able to see some of those responses. And Dave has assured everybody who couldn't see the poll questions, but have helpfully written your questions into the chat, those comments will also be captured as part of this response. So thank you for that, Dave. We are done for the first part of today's conference, everybody. So I'm now going to lead us on to our comfort break, our refreshment break. On to you, Mark, go on.
Yeah, I just want to sort of answer. George posed me a question, which I think is important to embrace.
Go on.
So, as George said, we've been awarded, following an application, additional funding to the ARC to support the development of mental health research and implementation capacity across the Northwest Coast. And this is something we're collaborating with across particularly the Northern ARCs. So please watch this space. But one of the things that we're doing is that we're pulling together a round table led by the IMPaCT group, looking at how we what our options are for developing this and looking at the detail of that. One of the things I'd like to also let colleagues know is that we are relaunching the Partner Priority Programme that you might remember from the Clark, but this time, instead of a focus being on reducing unplanned admission, it'll be a focus on mental health research and supporting the implementation of mental health research across our member organisations. So please keep an eye open for more information about this, but we will be looking in the new year to start to recruit early career researchers and colleagues from our member organisations with innovations that they wish to evaluate, or that they wish to research they wish to implement, or grants that they'd like help writing. So please watch this space, and if you're interested in being part of that round table, please do let us know. Sorry, Jerry, back to you.
No problem. Thank you, Mark. I think it was very important, and congratulations to George and the IMPaCT team on that fantastic achievement. Well done. We are going to move on to, as I stated, a refreshment break now, everybody. We are going to reconvene at 11:25. And as ever, the advice, please, is to stay on the platform. But whilst you're on your refreshment break, if you want to, you can turn off your cameras and your microphones. But we're reconvening at 11:25. Thank you for giving me your attention today, and good luck for the rest of the day.